He had gone to the hospital to do a DNA test, something that should have been simple. But when the results came, John could not believe what he saw. The child he had cared for all these years was not his. He turned to his wife, Sandra, holding the papers in his trembling hands. This cannot be true, he said, hoping she would tell him it was a mistake. But Sandra only shook her head. She denied it. Even with the evidence staring them both in the face, she refused to admit the truth. John felt the world tilt beneath him. How could the life he had built on love and trust be a lie? Years before the shock, John and Sandra had been praying for a child. They had waited and hoped and sometimes cried in secret. And finally, their prayers were answered. They were blessed with a baby girl, and they named her Beauty. From the moment she was born, she brought light into their home. Her laughter filled the rooms, her little hands brought comfort, and her smile brought hope. Everyone who saw her could not help but love her. Beauty was a gift, a sign that God had heard their prayers. For a time, everything felt perfect. But sometimes, even the brightest gifts hide secrets. Now Beauty was 10 years old. She was clever, cheerful, and full of life. But John began to notice little things. Her features did not resemble his. Her mannerisms, the way she laughed, even the way she carried herself, it was not like him at all. He tried to push the thought away at first. Maybe he was just imagining it. But the feeling would not leave him. Deep in his heart, he began to ask a question he had never dared to say out loud: is this really my child? The thought unsettled him. John loved Beauty dearly, but something about her did not feel right. And he knew, even if he did not yet understand it, that the truth would change everything. John could not sleep that night. His mind kept returning to the DNA results, to Sandra's calm denial, to the little girl playing in the other room, unaware of the storm that was about to hit their home. He loved Beauty, of course he did. But how could he love someone who might not even be his own blood? The next morning, John decided he had to find answers. He started quietly asking questions, trying not to alarm Sandra. He called the hospital, asked about the doctors who had been there when Beauty was born. He even spoke to some of the nurses who had helped with the delivery, hoping for some clue, some hint that could explain the impossible. Days passed, and nothing made sense. But one evening, while looking through some old hospital files, John noticed something strange. There were 2 babies born at the same time in the same ward, Beauty and another child. Somehow, the papers had been mixed up. His heart raced. Could it be? John's hands shook as he held the documents. Everything started to fall into place, the differences he had noticed in Beauty, the uneasy feeling he could never shake. She was not his biological daughter. But she had been switched, intentionally or by accident, he did not yet know. He confronted Sandra again, gently this time, hiding the anger and pain in his voice. Sandra, do you know about this? Was there another baby? Were we given the wrong child? Sandra looked down, avoiding his eyes. Her silence said more than words could. John felt a mixture of anger, fear, and sorrow. How long had this secret been kept? Who had taken their child? And most importantly, who was Beauty really? Determined to uncover the truth, John began to investigate quietly. He went back to the hospital every day, speaking to old staff, checking old files, asking questions. The deeper he dug, the more he realized the situation was bigger than he had imagined. One nurse, an older woman who had worked in the hospital for decades, finally spoke. Mr. Ekinwell, there was a mix-up that night. 2 babies, one left with the wrong parents. Nobody knows how it happened for sure, but one child was switched. John's heart sank, but at the same time, a strange relief washed over him. The truth was out. Beauty was not his by blood, but she was still the same little girl he had loved for 10 years. She was still the child who had brought light to his home. Tears welled up in his eyes. How could he tell her? How could he explain that the world he had built for her had been built on a secret? And what of the parents who had lost their child that night? John went home that evening and watched Beauty play. She laughed, danced, and ran around the yard, completely unaware of the storm raging in the adult world. He sat on the porch and whispered softly to himself, "She may not be my child by blood, but she will always be my child by heart." The next days were not easy. John and Sandra had many long talks, trying to decide how to tell Beauty the truth. They both knew it had to be handled carefully. She was only 10, too young to understand the full depth of what had happened. But John also knew that the truth, no matter how painful, could not be hidden forever. Finally, they sat Beauty down and told her a simple story. No accusations, no guilt, just honesty. "Beauty," John said, holding her small hands, "you are loved. You may not look like me, but you are our daughter in every way that matters. Nothing can change that." Beauty smiled, her eyes wide and innocent. "Does that mean I'm special?" she asked. John laughed through his tears. "Yes, my darling. You are very special." The days that followed were filled with quiet healing. John still worried about the other child who had been switched, and he knew he had to find them someday. But for now, he focused on the little girl who had been in his life for 10 years. He realized that family was not only about blood. It was about love, care, and the bond you build over time. Beauty may have been switched at birth, but she had never been anything less than his daughter in every way that mattered. And so, John made a promise to himself and to Beauty, that no matter what secrets the world held, he would always be there for her. Because being a father was not just about DNA, it was about heart, and his heart belonged to her forever. Weeks later, John's thoughts turned to the other child, the one who had been switched with Beauty. Who were they? Where were they now? And were they being raised happily or in a family that loved them? He began searching quietly, tracing hospital records, talking to staff, and even putting feelers out to see if anyone remembered the babies from that day. The answers were not easy to find, but John was determined. He realized that uncovering the truth would not only affect Beauty but also another family who had been unknowingly denied their child for 10 years. John could not stop thinking about the child who had been switched with Beauty. Every day he asked himself, who were they? Were they happy? Did they have parents who loved them? He started revisiting old hospital files, slowly piecing together every detail from that day. Nurses' notes, doctors' reports, even birth certificates, everything he could find, he collected. It was tedious work, but he refused to give up. One afternoon, an old nurse remembered something. "I think one of the children went to a family living in the next town. I can't remember much, but it was around the same time as Beauty's birth." John felt a spark of hope. At last, a real lead. Determined, John traveled to the town the nurse mentioned. He walked through streets, asking questions quietly, not wanting anyone to know why he was looking. Days passed, and just when he thought he would not find anything, he heard about a girl named Amara, who had been raised by a loving couple but whose birth parents were unknown. John's heart pounded. Could Amara be the child switched with Beauty? John finally met Amara. She was 10 years old, just like Beauty, and there was something familiar in her smile, a glimmer of recognition he could not explain. He spoke carefully to her parents, explaining who he was and why he had come. They were shocked but welcoming. They had always wondered about the origins of their child and were curious to hear the story. For the first time, John saw the possibility of reconnecting not just with Beauty but with the family whose child had been lost. At last, the truth came out. Amara had indeed been switched with Beauty at birth. It had been an accident, a mistake in the hospital that had gone unnoticed. The two families were stunned, but the relief was immense. The child they had loved for 10 years was safe, and the child who had been missing from them was finally identified. It was a moment of bittersweet joy, pain for the years lost, but happiness that the truth had finally emerged. John returned home and spoke to Beauty again. He explained gently, "Beauty, there was a mix-up when you were born. You were switched with another child. But you must know, nothing will ever change my love for you. You are my daughter in every way that matters." Beauty listened quietly, processing the words. Then she smiled. "So, I'm special, Papa." "Yes, my darling," John said. "Very special." After discussions with both families, John decided it was time for Beauty and Amara to meet. The two girls, 10 years old and unaware of the full drama, were shy at first. But soon, they were laughing, playing, and sharing stories. It was as if they had known each other their whole lives. Despite the confusion and the pain, a bond began to form between them. The two families spent more time together, learning to heal from the past. John and Sandra realized that mistakes do not erase love, they simply make it stronger when handled with care. Amara's parents also learned to accept that their child had been raised with love elsewhere but was still part of their family in heart. Over time, Beauty and Amara grew close, almost like sisters. They shared secrets, played games, and supported each other. John felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew the truth had hurt, but it had also brought new connections, new hope, and new love into their lives. John could not help but think about the hospital staff responsible for the switch. While it had been an accident, he knew accountability was important. He contacted the hospital, and they admitted the mistake, promising to ensure it would never happen again. This helped John find some closure. It was a painful chapter, but the healing had begun. Beauty and Amara began spending weekends together. The two families started sharing holidays, birthdays, and other celebrations. The bond between the children strengthened, and the parents, too, learned to appreciate the unexpected gift life had given them. John reflected on everything that had happened. He realized that family is not only about blood. It is about love, care, and dedication. Beauty was not his by blood, but she was his in every way that mattered. Amara, though switched at birth, had her own loving parents, and both children had found joy despite the confusion. Life, John realized, had a way of teaching the deepest lessons in the hardest ways. John often thought about the lessons he had learned. Life was unpredictable. Sometimes, the most painful truths could lead to the greatest growth. Beauty had taught him that love cannot be measured by blood alone, and Amara had reminded him that family is built in the heart. He held both girls close, knowing that they had all been through a journey that few could ever imagine. But they had survived, and together, they had found happiness. Years later, the families remained close. Beauty and Amara were like sisters, sharing their joys, sorrows, and dreams. John often smiled as he watched them play, remembering the long, difficult journey that had brought them here. He knew one thing for certain: family is not just about who gives you life, it is about who stands by you, who loves you, and who chooses to be there no matter what. And in his heart, John knew he had the most precious gift of all, a family bound not by mistake, but by love, forever.